Professor Zalvorik had traveled across the stars to reach this strange world. The planet, known as New Terra, was a human colony, a place where the most feared species in the galaxy lived. He sat inside his small observation pod, hidden in a quiet corner of the colony's main city. His large yellow eyes blinked as he looked through his holographic screen, analyzing the humans walking outside. "They do not look dangerous," he muttered to himself, his voice a low whisper. The Terran Dominion, his homeworld, had always warned its people about humans. The stories were terrifying. Humans were not the strongest species, nor the fastest, nor the largest, but they were the most dangerous. They had fought wars against powerful empires and won. They had survived impossible conditions. They refused to surrender. Some even said that human children were dangerous, but that part Zalvorik found difficult to believe. How could children be a threat? Surely they were weak and harmless, like the young of every other species. He had come to find out the truth. Zalvorik disguised himself as a diplomatic observer, wearing a dark cloak that covered his blue-gray skin. He adjusted his translator device and stepped outside into the human colony. The streets were wide and clean, with tall buildings made of shining metal and glass. Machines flew in the sky, carrying goods from place to place. Humans walked in small groups, talking and laughing. Zalvorik kept his head down and moved carefully. His people had warned him never to anger a human, but no one even noticed him. They were too busy with their daily lives. He saw a group of human workers lifting large metal crates, their muscles straining. On his world, machines did most of the heavy lifting. Why did humans still use their own strength? Further ahead, he saw a woman trip and fall. A hard fall. Zalvorik winced, expecting her to cry out in pain. Instead, she laughed, stood up, and kept walking as if nothing had happened. His mind filled with questions. Why did they not show weakness? Did they not feel pain? Then something caught his attention. Something small but strange. A group of human children were gathered in a large open area, playing a game. They looked young, far too young to be threats. Some were as small as his own people's younglings. They ran around, laughing and shouting, chasing one another with boundless energy. Zalvorik watched, curious. The game seemed simple. One child held a red cloth, the flag, while the others tried to steal it. But what shocked him was how aggressively they played. They tackled each other, rolling across the grass. They climbed, jumped, dodged, and blocked with incredible speed. One boy fell hard onto the ground, scraping his knee against the rough surface. Blood appeared. Zalvorik's heart pounded. Surely, now he would cry. Surely, now he would stop. But the child only glanced at his wound, grinned, and kept playing. Zalvorik's hands trembled. On his world, younglings were protected and kept safe at all costs. A simple fall would require immediate medical care. But this child, he ignored his own injury as if it did not matter. Then he saw something even more terrifying. A girl, a small, thin human, was cornered by two others. She had no escape. In a normal situation, one would surrender. But not a human child. Instead, she charged forward. She threw herself into the enemy, knocked them over, and ran away laughing. Zalvorik's eyes widened. Even when outnumbered, humans refused to give up. Even as children, they fought with courage. Now he understood the fear. It was not just that humans were strong. It was not just that they were fast. It was that even their children refused to break. Zalvorik stepped back, feeling the weight of his discovery. If human younglings were this tough, this unshaken by pain, then what would they become as adults? His mission had just begun, but he already knew one thing for certain. The galaxy was right to fear humans. And perhaps they had not feared them enough. Professor Zalvorik could not stop thinking about what he had seen. The human children were fighting for fun, and not just simple play. They tackled, ran, climbed, and even took injuries without hesitation. In any other species, younglings were weak and fragile. They avoided pain. They feared confrontation. But human children, they treated it as a game. The thought sent shivers down his spine. Zalvorik needed to understand more. Why were they like this? Was this training? Was this some kind of survival instinct? Or were humans simply born this way? A curious conversation. Zalvorik approached a human teacher standing nearby, watching over the children. She was a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and a kind smile. Her name tag read Ms. Carter. Taking a deep breath, Zalvorik activated his translator and spoke in the most polite tone possible. "Excuse me, honored educator," he said, bowing slightly, as was the custom on his world. Ms. Carter gave him a puzzled look but smiled. "Oh, you must be one of the alien observers. What can I do for you?" Zalvorik glanced at the children still running and shouting, completely unaware of the horror they inspired in the rest of the galaxy. These younglings. He hesitated, trying to choose his words carefully. They are very energetic. Ms. Carter laughed. "Oh yes, they never run out of energy." Zalvorik pointed at a boy who had just tripped, rolling across the ground before bouncing back up like nothing happened. "Is this normal?" he asked. The teacher followed his gaze and chuckled. "Of course. Kids fall all the time. It's how they learn." Zalvorik's mind froze. "You let them fall?" "Of course," she shrugged. "If they never fall, how will they learn to stand back up?" Zalvorik felt his heart race. He had heard rumors about human resilience, but this was beyond belief. "You do not stop them?" he asked, confused. Ms. Carter gave him an amused look. "Why would we? They're just playing." "Playing," Zalvorik repeated. "But they are attacking each other. They are strategizing. They are learning." Ms. Carter interrupted gently. "This is how they grow. They test their limits. They fall, they get hurt, but they get back up. That's what makes them stronger." Zalvorik felt dizzy. The Terek Dominion believed in sheltering younglings. Their children were protected at all costs. Even a minor injury was considered dangerous. But humans treated pain as a teacher. A shocking demonstration. Ms. Carter must have noticed his disbelief because she suddenly smiled. "Actually, you're in luck. The kids have martial arts training today. If you really want to see something interesting, come with me." Martial arts. Zalvorik gulped. The idea of training children in combat would be seen as madness in the Dominion. But Ms. Carter led him toward a large indoor hall where a group of children, no older than 10 years old, stood in neat rows. An instructor, a tall man with a muscular build, stood before them. "All right, kids," he said, clapping his hands. "Pair up. Let's practice counters and takedowns." Zalvorik watched in horror and fascination as the children immediately moved into pairs and began wrestling each other to the ground. He flinched as one child threw another over her shoulder with perfect technique. The fallen boy groaned but grinned, shaking off the impact before getting back up. "Good throw, Lisa," he said before charging at her again. Zalvorik's mind struggled to process what he was witnessing. This was not training. This was instinct. The children didn't just learn to fight. They enjoyed it. They took hits and got back up. They lost but kept trying. It was not violence. It was not anger. It was simply who they were. The unbreakable spirit of humanity. Zalvorik turned to Ms. Carter, his voice shaky. This is why the galaxy fears you," he whispered. Ms. Carter raised an eyebrow. "Because our kids take a few falls. Because they do not stay down," Zalvorik said. "Because they see pain as a challenge, not a defeat." Ms. Carter smiled warmly. "That's humanity for you." Zalvorik took a deep breath, watching as the children continued their training, laughing and learning from every failure. He had spent years studying war records, listening to tales of human strength and endurance. but nothing had prepared him for this. The real reason the galaxy feared humans was not their weapons, not their armies, not even their history of war. It was because, from the moment they could walk, humans learned one simple truth. No matter how many times they fell, they would always rise again. Professor Xalvorik sat on a bench outside the training hall, his mind racing. The human children were not warriors, yet they'd fought like champions. They were not soldiers, yet they trained with discipline. And most terrifying of all, they enjoyed it. He needed answers. Nearby, a group of children sat on the grass, chatting and laughing after their martial arts session. One of them, a boy with messy brown hair and a big grin, noticed Xalvorik staring. "Hey, mister, you look funny," the boy said, walking over. Xalvorik blinked. Humans were known for their lack of fear, but this child showed no hesitation at all in approaching a strange alien. "I am observing," Xalvorik said carefully. The boy sat down cross-legged in front of him. "Cool. My name's Jake. Who are you?" "I am Professor Xalvorik, an academic researcher from the Terek Dominion," he replied. Jake's face lit up. "Oh, so you're like a space scientist?" Xalvorik hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, something like that." Jake grinned. "Awesome. What are you studying?" Xalvorik glanced at the other children, still full of energy despite their training. He sighed. "Humans." Jake's grin widened. "That's easy. We're awesome." Xalvorik tilted his head. "And why do you believe that?" Jake's expression turned serious for a moment. He grabbed a small rock and held it up. "See this?" Xalvorik nodded. Jake clenched his fist around the rock, pressing it hard. His small hands trembled with effort, but he did not let go. "This is pain," Jake said. "It hurts, but if I keep holding it, I get used to it." He opened his hand, revealing a red mark where the rock had pressed against his skin. "And when I let go, I feel stronger." Xalvorik's eyes widened. "You train yourself to endure pain." Jake shrugged. "Pain happens. You can either cry about it, or you can learn from it." Xalvorik stared at the child in shock. The Terek people avoided pain at all costs. It was seen as a weakness, a sign of danger. But humans did the opposite. They treated pain like a test, something to overcome. "Adults say the same thing," Jake continued. "They tell us, you gotta be tough. Life's hard, but you gotta keep going." Xalvorik could not believe what he was hearing. This mentality was trained into them from childhood. Jake stood up, stretching his arms. "You know what my dad says." "What?" Xalvorik asked cautiously. Jake grinned. "If you fall 7 times, stand up 8. Xalvorik felt a chill run through his body. The phrase was simple, but it explained everything. Humans were not strong because of their muscles. They were not dangerous because of their weapons. They were unstoppable because they refused to stay down. A deeper fear. Xalvorik sat in silence as Jake ran off to join his friends. He had come to study humanity, but he was beginning to realize something terrifying. The galaxy had been afraid of the wrong thing. Most species feared human technology or their military power, but that was not what made them dangerous. It was their spirit. Even from childhood, humans pushed through pain. They refused to quit. They turned suffering into strength. And what happens when a species like that grows up? A galactic secret revealed. That night, Xalvorik sent a report to the Terek High Council. His fingers trembled as he typed. Subject: URGNTFINDINGS humanity. Honored leaders, I have confirmed that human children are not weak. In fact, they are more resilient than most adult warriors of our species. Humans do not fear pain. They embrace it. They treat it as part of life, as a lesson, as something to overcome. This is why they are so feared across the galaxy. Not because of their armies, not because of their weapons, but because, even as children, they are taught to endure, to adapt, and to rise again, no matter how many times they fall. If human younglings are this strong, then their adults must be truly unstoppable. I recommend that we never make an enemy of humanity. Zalvorik hesitated before adding one final line. Or else we will face a war we can never win. With a deep breath, he sent the message. And for the first time in his life, he felt a fear that would never leave him. Professor Zalvorik couldn't sleep. His report had been sent to the Terek High Council, but the thoughts in his mind refused to rest. Humans were not like other species. They did not fear pain. They did not avoid struggle. They embraced it. And that made them the most dangerous beings in the galaxy. But something still bothered him. He had seen human children train and fall, yet always get back up. He had heard their sayings about resilience. But was this only a lesson they were taught? Or was it something deeper, something instinctual? He needed more proof. A challenge like no other. The next morning, Zalvorik visited the colony's survival training center. It was a massive outdoor facility where young humans learned to endure extreme conditions. He expected to see adults training, but to his shock, the ones taking part were still children. Human children, training for survival. Zalvorik watched as a group of kids, no older than 12, stood at the edge of an obstacle course. Tall walls, muddy water, climbing ropes, and trenches filled with sand stretched ahead of them. A muscular instructor stood before the group. "All right, recruits," the man barked. "Today's lesson is perseverance. The goal is simple: reach the finish line, no matter what." Zalvorik's eyes widened. No matter what. One child, a small girl with blonde hair, raised her hand. "Sir, what if we fall?" The instructor grinned. "Then you get back up." Zalvorik felt a chill run down his spine. The whistle blew, and the children charged forward. The strength of the weakest. Zalvorik followed the group as they hit the first challenge, a wall twice their height. The strongest kids climbed easily, pulling themselves up with impressive agility. Others struggled, slipping and falling onto the ground. The Zalvorik expected them to give up. Instead, something shocking happened. The faster children didn't leave the weak behind. They helped them up. One boy slipped for the third time, panting hard, his arms shaking. Before he could fall again, a girl grabbed his hand. "Come on," she urged. "We don't quit." With her help, the boy made it to the top. Zalvorik's breath caught in his throat. Even when one was weak, the others made them strong. This was something the galaxy did not understand. Humans did not survive alone. They lifted each other up. Through pain and fire, the children moved on, facing deeper challenges. Some got stuck in the mud pits, but they crawled forward anyway. Some fell from the climbing ropes, but they tried again. Others grew tired, panting, barely able to move, yet they kept walking. One child twisted his ankle halfway through the course. He winced but refused to stop. Zalvorik rushed forward. "He is injured. Should you not stop the test?" he asked the instructor. The man shook his head. "Watch." Zalvorik turned back just in time to see something unbelievable. The injured boy stood up on one leg, gripping his knee. His face was twisted in pain, but his eyes burned with determination. Another child came to his side, putting an arm around him. "Come on," she said. "We finish this together." The boy nodded, and they moved forward, limping but never stopping. Zalvorik's hands trembled. This was beyond training. This was who humans were, reaching the finish line. One by one, the children crossed the finish line. Some were covered in mud, some limped, some gasped for air, but none had given up. The instructor clapped his hands. "Well done, recruits. You've all proven one thing today." He looked at them seriously. "You are stronger than your pain, stronger than your weakness. You are human, and that means you don't quit." The children cheered. Zalvorik felt faint. He had studied human warfare. He had read about their history of victories against impossible odds. But now he understood the truth. Humans did not win because of their weapons. They did not conquer because of their strength. They won because they never accepted defeat, even when broken, even when weak, even when suffering. They never gave up. And that, more than anything else, made them the most dangerous species in the galaxy. A message to the stars. That night, Xalvorik sent another urgent message to the Terek High Council. Subject: Critical update on humanity. Esteemed leaders, my previous report spoke of human resilience. Today, I have witnessed something even more terrifying. Humans are not strong because they do not fall. They are strong because falling does not stop them. Even their weakest members, their children, possess an iron will that cannot be broken. They help each other. They endure pain. They refuse to surrender. This is the true power of humanity. We must never mistake their kindness for weakness. If war ever comes, humanity will fight until their last breath. And even then, they will find a way to rise again. Xalvorik hesitated before adding a final note. Perhaps it is better to be their friend than their enemy. With a deep breath, he sent the message. And for the first time in his life, he felt something strange. Not fear, but admiration. Professor Xalvorik had spent weeks studying humans, yet every new discovery shocked him more than the last. He had seen their children train like warriors. He had seen them endure pain without complaint. He had seen them refuse to surrender, no matter how difficult the challenge. Now, he wanted to see something different. What happens when a human is truly broken? Would they finally give up? Or was their spirit truly unbreakable? He was about to find out. A dangerous experiment. Xalvorik had heard about a human named David, a former soldier who had survived a brutal war. David had lost everything: his home, his friends, even one of his legs. By all logic, he should have given up. Yet the humans spoke of him with respect and admiration. They called him strong, fearless, and unstoppable. Xalvorik had to understand why. So he arranged a meeting. The man who refused to fall. David sat in a wheelchair, gazing out at the colony's training field. His artificial leg rested beside him, disconnected. Xalvorik approached cautiously. "Greetings, human David." David turned his head, smiling. "Just call me Dave, Professor." Xalvorik hesitated, then nodded. "Dave, may I ask you a question?" Dave chuckled. "I figured you would. Go ahead." The professor sat beside him, choosing his words carefully. "You have lost much. Your body is damaged. Your life has changed. Tell me, how do you continue?" Dave raised an eyebrow. "You mean, why didn't I give up?" Xalvorik nodded. Dave exhaled, looking up at the sky. "Because I'm still breathing." Xalvorik frowned. "I do not understand." Dave leaned forward. "Look, Professor, I lost my leg. Yeah, it was bad. I could have let it break me. But you know what?" He tapped his chest. "My heart's still beating. My mind still works. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm not done yet." Xalvorik felt chills. "Even with all your suffering?" Dave laughed. "Suffering? Nah. I call it a lesson." "Ed lesson." Dave picked up his prosthetic leg and began attaching it. The universe doesn't care how hard life is. Pain happens. Bad things happen. You can either sit around and cry about it, or you can get back up and keep moving forward. Xalvorik stared. How? How could a being lose so much and still keep fighting? He had seen species crumble under far less. But humans? They endured. Even when life tried to crush them, they stood back up. The fire that never dies. Dave finished attaching his leg and slowly stood up, balancing himself. He took a deep breath. "You know what my surgeon used to say?" Dave asked, smiling. Xalvorik shook his head. Dave's voice became firm. "Pain is temporary. Quitting lasts forever." Xalvorik clenched his hands. Humans did not just survive hardship. They took hardship and turned it into fuel. This was why the galaxy feared them. They were not the strongest. They were not the fastest, but they were the hardest to kill. Because no matter what happened, humans kept going. And if they could not walk, they crawled. And if they could not crawl, they found another way. Zalvorik finally understood. Humanity's greatest weapon was not their technology. It was their spirit, a warning to the stars. That night, Zalvorik sent a final report to the Terek High Council. Subject: the true danger of humanity. Esteemed leaders, we were wrong about the humans. We feared their weapons. We feared their armies. But those are not their greatest strength. The true danger of humanity is their unbreakable will. They do not surrender. They do not stay down. Even when broken, they rise again. We cannot fight such a species. If war comes, we will not face mere soldiers. We will face a force that will never stop, never yield, never die. And that is why we must never make them our enemy. Zalvorik hesitated for a moment, then added one final line. Perhaps it is better if we learn from them instead. With that, he sent the message. And for the first time in his life, he did not feel fear. He felt respect. Professor Zalvorik sat quietly in his study, staring at the glowing screen of his communication device. The message he had sent to the Terek High Council was still fresh in his mind. For years, the galaxy had feared humanity for their strength, their unpredictable nature, and their refusal to back down. But now, Zalvorik had come to understand the truth. It was not their technology or weapons that made them terrifying. It was their spirit. But one question still remained. Could this unbreakable nature be taught? Or was it something that only humans possessed? He needed to find out. An unusual request. The next morning, Zalvorik approached Captain Reynolds, the leader of the Human Colony's training center. "I have a request," Zalvorik said carefully. Reynolds raised an eyebrow. "A request? From a Terakian. This should be interesting." Zalvorik hesitated, then spoke. "I wish to experience human endurance training." Reynolds blinked. Then, to Zalvorik's shock, he laughed. "You? A scientist? You want to go through military training?" "Yes," Zalvorik said firmly. Reynolds studied him, then smirked. "All right, Professor. Let's see what you're made of." A harsh introduction. The next day, Zalvorik stood alongside a group of human recruits, all dressed in training uniforms. He had assumed this would be a lesson in mental discipline, perhaps involving meditation or simple physical exercises. He was wrong. A whistle blew. "Movie recruits," the instructor shouted. Zalvorik barely had time to react before the humans took off running. He scrambled after them, his 3 legs struggling to keep pace. They ran through mud, over obstacles, up steep hills. His body burned. His breath became ragged. But the humans, they kept running. Faster, stronger, never stopping. Zalvorik stumbled. He fell into the dirt, panting heavily. His body screamed at him to quit. But before he could give up, a hand appeared in front of him. It was one of the recruits, a young woman with a determined smile. "Come on, Professor," she said. "We don't leave anyone behind." Zalvorik stared at her, then hesitantly took her hand. The humans helped him up, and for the first time, he understood something new. Pain is not the end. The training continued. Zalvorik's muscles ached. His lungs burned. His legs felt like they would collapse at any moment. But the humans did not mock him. They encouraged him. "Keep going, Professor. You're stronger than you think. Don't stop now." Even when he was the weakest among them, they lifted him up. For the first time, Zalvorik saw humanity not as warriors, but as a family. They did not abandon the weak. They turned them into something stronger. And that was why they could never be defeated. The final challenge. Hours later, Zalvorik stood at the edge of the final obstacle, a towering wall, slick with mud. His body trembled. He had never been so exhausted in his life. A voice echoed in his mind. Pain is temporary. Quitting lasts forever. With a deep breath, the Zalvorik charged forward. He jumped, reaching for the top, but his grip failed. He slid back down, landing hard. He groaned. His body begged him to stop. Then, suddenly, he heard voices. Try again, Professor. You're almost there. You can do this. Zalvorik gritted his teeth. He was a scientist, not a soldier. A scholar, not a warrior. And yet, something inside him refused to quit. With every last ounce of strength, he leaped again. This time, hands reached down, grabbing his arms, pulling him up. And for the first time in his life, Zalvorik climbed to victory. A new perspective. When Zalvorik crossed the finish line, he collapsed into the dirt. He expected to feel humiliation, but instead, he felt pride. Captain Reynolds crouched beside him. Not bad, Professor. Not bad at all. Zalvorik looked up, his breathing heavy. I understand now. Reynolds smirked. And what's that? Zalvorik took a deep breath. Humans do not win because they are stronger, but because they never stop fighting. Reynolds chuckled. Now you're getting it. Zalvorik sat up, gazing at the recruits who had helped him. Your strength is not just in your bodies, he said softly. It is in your hearts. The recruits grinned. And at that moment, Zalvorik realized something incredible. He had come to study humanity. But instead, he had become one of them. Professor Zalvorik sat alone under the bright twin moons of the colony planet, staring at the training field where human recruits still ran, climbed, and pushed themselves past their limits. He had come here as a scientist, seeking to understand why the galaxy feared humans, even their children. Now he had his answer. Humans were not invincible. They were not the strongest. They were not the fastest. But they were the hardest to break. Even when they were weak, they refused to stay weak. Even when they fell, they got back up. Even when the universe threw its worst at them, they fought back harder. And that made them unstoppable. An invitation. Zalvorik was still lost in thought when Captain Reynolds approached him. Professor, Reynolds said, we're heading back to Earth next week. Thought you should know. Zalvorik nodded. I appreciate the information, Captain. Reynolds studied him for a moment. You've changed, Professor. You're not the same alien who first came here, scared of human children. Zalvorik chuckled. Indeed. I have learned much. Reynolds crossed his arms. So, what's next for you? Going back to the Terek homeworld to report your findings. Zalvorik hesitated. His mind told him yes. That was the logical choice. But his heart whispered something else. For the first time in his life, he felt something he never thought he would. A desire to stay. He turned to Reynolds. Captain, do you think a Terekian could live among humans? Reynolds smirked. If you can survive training camp, you can survive anything. Zalvorik smiled. Then perhaps, I shall stay a little longer. A message to the stars. That night, Zalvorik sent one final message to the Terek High Council. Subject, the future of the galaxy. Esteemed leaders, my time among humans has taught me more than I ever expected. We have feared them, believing them to be dangerous and unpredictable. But I tell you now, our fear is misplaced. Yes, humans are warriors. Yes, they are survivors. But they are also builders, explorers, and dreamers. They do not conquer with weapons. They conquer with ideas, with willpower, with an unbreakable spirit. They do not just endure hardship, they turn it into strength. And if we are wise, we will not fight them. We will stand beside them. For the future belongs not to the strongest species, but to the ones who refuse to give up. And in that, the humans have already won. Zalvorik sent the message and took a deep breath. For the first time in his life, he did not feel like an outsider in the universe. He felt like he belonged. The beginning of a new era. Days later, Zalvorik stood with Captain Reynolds and his team as they boarded their ship. The professor did not follow them. Instead, he turned to the human recruits, many of whom were now his friends. "Are you sure about this?" one of them asked. Zalvorik smiled. "I have never been more certain of anything in my life." Reynolds clapped him on the shoulder. "Then welcome to the family, Professor." As the human ship took off into the sky, Zalvorik looked around at his new home. He had come here as a scientist. Now he was something more. He was part of humanity's future, and in the vast, endless universe, that was the greatest honor of all.